Good morning. How many of you, I assume that all of you know something now about blockchain and understanding at least a very basic way what a cryptocurrency is. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time dealing with that, but I'm very happy if you have questions during the question and answer session to go into it. I first heard the very concept of Bitcoin in about 2010, which was roughly 1 year after it had been invented, when somebody walked into my office and asked me, is it legal in the Bahamas? Well, I didn't know what they were talking about, so I very quickly had to start getting up to speed on what is Bitcoin and what are regulations about it. As it happened, there was not much at the time. And we've made a little progress, but I think we still have not made a lot. As of 19th August 2018, there were more than 1,600 cryptocurrencies that can be traded on the internet. The total market cap is just a little less than $28 billion. So clearly this is not a phenomenon that we can ignore. And we certainly have to make sure that we take our place in that market in the Bahamas. Now, the difference between cryptocurrency and electronic money. I've skipped the explanation of cryptocurrency, but hopefully this still will be useful. Any payment system, any digital payment system, such as your credit card, your debit card, PayPal, could be considered to be electronic money. In fact, I was recently in China, and in the taxi, and I took what we call at home a robot taxi because I couldn't get one of the regular licensed taxis. The gentleman was insisting that I pay him with my phone, and I had no idea what he was talking about. Well, this is it that you see on the screen. It's something called Alipay, and there is stored value on that phone, and one phone then transmits it to another phone. So I felt like a serious country bumpkin because I'd never dealt with anything like that before. This is electronic money, but it's not cryptocurrency. And the main distinction is that when you store value on your phone like that, really all you're doing is digitizing what they call fiat money. Fiat money is money backed by the crown, by the government. In other words, you can go to Mr. Simonet and you say, I have $20 on this phone. It's actually a claim against the government that you can call on at any time. So that's not what a cryptocurrency is. Cryptocurrencies exist totally in the realm that they were created in, and it's all about algorithms. But if you have a question about that, I'm happy to answer. In the case of a cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, not only is there no fiat in the sense of no government standing behind it, but there really is no issuer of the coin as the coins are mined. So what are the advantages of a cryptocurrency? I'm going to read this quotation to you. It's a long one, but I love it because it kind of sums up everything. Instant transactions, no waiting for checks to clear, no chargebacks. Merchants will like this. No account freezes, look out PayPal, no international wire transfer fee, no fees of any kind, no minimum balance, no maximum balance, worldwide access, always open, no waiting for business hours to make transactions, no waiting for an account to be approved before transacting, open an account in a few seconds, as easy as email, no bank account needed, extremely poor people can use it, extremely wealthy people can use it, no printing press, no hyperinflation, no debt limit votes, no bank bailouts, completely voluntary. This sounds like the best payment system in the world. So why are regulators worried? The first reason is money laundering. Some of the very advantages of cryptocurrencies lend to some of the challenges that are being faced. And here's a quote from Jamie Dimon, who's the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan. He says, if you were in Venezuela or Ecuador or North Korea or a bunch of parts like that, or if you were a drug dealer, a murderer, stuff like that, you're better off doing it in Bitcoin than in US dollars. Obviously, there's anonymity. The transactions are essentially untraceable. And so it's an ideal vehicle for money laundering, financing of terrorism, and other illegal activities. Difficulty of supervision. Janet Yellen said the Federal Reserve simply does not have authority to supervise or regulate Bitcoin in any way. One of the challenges that the regulators are facing is just trying to determine exactly what is cryptocurrency. Which of the old school categories does it fit in? Is it money? Is it a security? Is it a commodity? And they've answered that question in various ways, but none of them quite satisfactorily. The other problem is that it's a little difficult to understand how the value is determined. Obviously, if it's traded on an exchange, you can see from day to day the variations in the volume. So you know that in 2010, a Bitcoin was 6 cents, and today it's roughly $6,500. But why? What stands behind that? And it's a little difficult for people to understand that. So Warren Buffett, who I respect, says, stay away from it. It's a mirage, basically. And it can obviously be used as a vehicle of fraud. So the first question is it money? The Florida courts had to answer that in 2014, and they said Bitcoin could not properly be described as money as it is not commonly used as a means of exchange, has limited ability to act as a store of value, and is not backed by any central authority or by tangible wealth. Now, in that case, Florida and Espinoza, there was a sting operation in which a Florida policeman tried to charge someone with money laundering for attempting to sell him Bitcoins. And the court said, not so much. It's not money. They're not laundering anything. They tried various other charges, and none of them quite fit the circumstances. And so nothing stuck. The court said attempting to fit the sale of Bitcoin into a statutory scheme regulating monetary services businesses is like fitting a square peg in a round hole. So there were also attempted charges of trying to practice money transmission business without a license and so on. And the court didn't go for any of that. The US approach currently is to treat cryptocurrencies as a commodity. And one of the reasons that they've done that is that they say, well, only the Federal Reserve has the authority to issue money. So it has to be something else. It can't be money. And so the Commodity Futures Trading Commission has said Bitcoin and other virtual currencies are encompassed in the definition and properly defined as commodities, which is defined in the Commodity Exchange Act as all services, rights, and interests in which contracts for future delivery are presently or in the future dealt in. That's a very general definition and could apply to almost anything, but that's the best they could do, and that's still where they are in the US. The EU approach, I can't say that they have a unified approach, but there's at least one case so far, and the question was whether that was applicable to a transaction in Bitcoins. And the court held, this is a case coming out of Sweden, the court felt that that was not payable because even though the cryptocurrency is not legal tender, it was a valid form of payment and it functioned very much like money. So they are leaning in the direction of treating it as money. And then there's the Swiss approach, which I like because there's a certain flexibility to it. The Swiss have declared themselves to be, their aspiration is to be the #1 crypto nation. And they have spent a lot of time trying to think through what needs to be done. So the first thing they've done is to amend their banking regulations to exempt all cryptocurrency providers that accept public funds to a maximum of 1 million Swiss francs from licensing. And the reason they've done that is to give some scope for, I suppose, sandbox activities, scope where persons can experiment with cryptocurrencies. And the provisos is they have to advise the clients that they're not backed by deposit insurance and that there's no certainty they'll get their money back. So if you want to play in the sandbox with them, you can go in there. They've set up a working group on blockchain and initial coin offerings. They've said that their AML/CFT regulations apply to custodian wallet providers and persons who deal in cryptocurrencies. And importantly, they've determined that the regulatory treatment of cryptocurrencies and initial coin offerings has to be decided on a case-by-case basis. So they're not going to try to put it immediately into the boxes that other people have tried to do, which is it a commodity? Is it money? Is it a security, which some people say? But they're going to look at each cryptocurrency, look at the features, and then determine what it is and how it should be treated from a regulatory standpoint. For wealth tax purposes, it's clearly going to be treated as money and specifically as foreign exchange. In terms of accounting, they've said cryptocurrencies are business assets and should be reflected in the financial statements. So what are we doing in the Bahamas? Right now, in terms of the actual legislation that has been passed, I'm only aware of 3 pieces of legislation that address virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies at all. First of all, the Payment Systems Act, which came into force in 2012, does have a licensing regime for issuers of electronic money. And that license would be granted by the Central Bank of the Bahamas. Electronic money is defined there as monetary value represented by a claim on the issuer, which is stored electronically, issued on receipt of funds for the purpose of making payment transactions, but does not amount to a deposit under the regulatory laws, and C, accepted as a means of payment by persons other than the issuer. So, in my opinion, there are 2 issues with that definition. I think that perfectly captures electronic money. I'm not sure it perfectly captures virtual money. And if the intention is that it should, then I think a few things will have to be considered. One of those things is there isn't always an issuer of virtual money. And the other thing is that I am not sure that it is correct to say that when you purchase a cryptocurrency, what you've done is store value electronically. Perhaps you could, but the final thing is I'm not sure that it's issued on receipt of funds for the purpose of making payment transactions. It would take a bit of time to go through why. I think those things don't necessarily fit, so I'm just going to leave that doubt there and move on. The other 2 pieces of legislation, of course, are the POCA 2018 and the FTRA 2018, Financial Transactions and Reporting Act 2018. Both of them came into effect on 25th May of this year. Virtual currency is now included in the definition of cash and in the definition of property. And virtual currency is defined as a digital representation of value which can be digitally traded and functions as A, medium of exchange, B, a unit of account, or C, a store of value that does not have legal tender status or carry any security or guarantee in any jurisdiction. And I think that properly captures virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies. Now, the effect of having virtual currency included in these definitions is that to the extent you're required to carry out KYC on particular persons in relation to cash transactions, that now includes virtual currency transactions. And to the extent that there are penalties under the POCA for certain things like money laundering, you need to understand that that now extends to virtual currency transactions. So there are still some issues, I think, that we need to think through, and a few of them are these. If we're treating virtual currency as cash, is it foreign exchange? Should the exchange control regulations apply? Is a Bitcoin purchase a financial transaction so as to be either zero rated or exempt from VAT? Should stamp tax apply as it applies to remittances abroad? How should initial coin offerings be regulated? I think the Securities Commission is thinking that through right now. How will property seizures under poker be effected? How should the law control misappropriation and wrongful dealing in virtual currencies? There is a whole academic discussion as to whether virtual currencies are in fact property. And those of you who are lawyers here know that property is sort of divided into what is a chosen action, which is an obligation that somebody owes to another person, perhaps under a contract. It doesn't fall into that, or a chosen possession, which is a tangible asset which can be delivered to you. It doesn't fall into that. So, can I steal it? That's a literal legal question that needs to be answered. And if I do, how do you treat with it? Is it possible to hold a virtual currency on trust? If it's not property, can it form the basis of a trust fund? Are units of virtual currency negotiable? How is the applicable law determined? If I have a transaction in Bitcoins with somebody who is pseudo-anonymous, how do you determine which law applies? Is it Bahamian law? Is it some other law? Is it where the software is located? If you consider it a securities transaction and you consider it to be a security, then you're going to have issues of lex loci, the law of the place where the asset is located. But where is the asset located? That's my little presentation, and I end by saying, for the answers to these and other questions, tune in.